All right. Hey, thank you everybody for the privilege of being invited to share with you, and also for your heart of care in terms of wanting to pray through issues relating to a world that I work and live in, and so it means a lot, and it's why I'm prepared to say yes. And coming into this, I just the verse that was sort of dominant in my brain was where Jesus exhorts us to pray to the Lord of the harvest, that the harvest is ripe and that the workers are few. And he doesn't say go and make more workers or whip up a bit of a frenzy and get more workers. He says pray that the Lord of the harvest would send out more workers. And that what I see on a daily basis are really the outworkings of a nation that has rejected God and chosen its own way, and so we reap the results of managing that. And the answers aren't found in any of our systems that are around us. Really don't care what your political persuasion is, because politicians don't have our answers. There are many well-meaning people, and I don't want to be disrespectful to them, but unless people acknowledge that Jesus is Lord of all and that he is the Lord of the harvest and he is the healer of the brokenhearted, unless we acknowledge that, and unless we actually invite him to be enthroned again in our nation, then very little will change. And so that's why I honour you in as a group and as a network, and the prayers that you're consistently praying in the different areas of our nation. So thank you for that, and thank you for the invitation. So just as I guess a little bit of a brushstroke, so that you're familiar with the Police Christian Support Network. As the blurb says, it's been running for a long time. Really, I guess the heartbeat of the Police Christian Support Network is we all come into this job as individuals, and many bring faith and the culture of organisations such as police, and it's not limited to police. Every industry and department carries its own culture, and they're often, I know universities are very squashing on faith of our young people that go into those places. And so the Police Christian Support Network was really developed to ensure that there was a support network for staff coming into police, so that they could know that there were others that had walked that road ahead of them. I mean, when I joined in 1989, I didn't know that there was such a thing as other Christians, and so I learned and made my own way, and God taught me how to walk this road. But the network aims to give Christians a safe place to encourage and support each other in faith. We run on two pillars. One is to support staff in their faith, but I felt some years ago that was a little bit, it wasn't enough, that if all we're going to do is sit in a back room and support people, that we actually wanted to empower and equip staff in their faith, to live their faith in the front line, to be lights in the dark places. And so that's really, I guess, my heart in chairing the network, is to exhort staff to not just survive in police, but to realise that there are just amazing open doors of opportunity to inspire a faith response where people are broken, that there are better ways. There's a God who loves them and who has solutions for their circumstances. And so, that we really in the network want to make sure that we equip our colleagues as they come in to know that they can live their faith on the front line. And so that leads to many beautiful stories. There's a lot of amazing staff around the country who are doing extraordinary things and impact lives. Just sometimes just by loving, and other times by going back after work and dropping off bags of groceries, or connecting with their churches and different things like that. So yeah, I love seeing staff get it and awaken and realise that ministry isn't something reserved to a church on Sunday, but it is the very essence of what we do in our work, that life is ministry. And so often when I speak in different places, people say, "Oh, you're a pastor," and I have great joy in saying, "No, I'm a police officer, and that's my full-time ministry. This is the place that God's called me to serve." And so I remember a senior member of police one time saying to me that I was a police officer who was a Christian, and I said, "No, you've got that around the wrong way. I'm a Christian who's a police officer, and that's my calling, is to represent Christ." And that's not threatening to anybody, because why is love threatening to anybody? Why is respect and honour and honouring our bosses and so forth? So yeah, so that's hopefully what the beauty of the network brings. And so just prayers that we are effective in that place would be great. Prayers as we build our next conference. Because conference is a really significant place when we get staff there, that often they really get an awakening to what the PCSN is all about. I guess I want to just share a couple of stories. I think stories are always a good way to illustrate points. I think that in our nation there is, as I've touched on, a lot of brokenness, and I sat in on a parole hearing of a man who's become my friend, and I'm probably a father to him in many ways. He's served a home detention sentence at my house. But I sat on his parole hearing a couple of days ago, and what came out in that hearing was a lot of the brokenness that he'd been through in life as he'd been put through various homes in our nation, and while supposedly in care of homes, he'd been sexually abused, and in more ways than you can imagine, in horrific ways over long periods of time. And this story could be repeated to you many times with different names and places. There was a Christian rehab house in my hometown here, Whakatane, that worked with such men for a long time. And I remember one of the leaders saying that he felt 9 out of 10 men that went through that place suffered from sexual abuse. And it gives an understanding that this friend of mine who was at a parole hearing, the first burglary he did was as a 12-year-old at the address of an uncle who used to rape him. And it was the only way he knew how to deal with the anger that was inside him. And so when you consider that in a rehab house, 9 out of 10 men that go through there have been sexually abused, and we see all the ugliness in our nation, and we see all the violence and the anger, do we ever ask where that anger came from? Do we ever know what has caused that? And so the church really needs to find a way to rise up and love the broken, not judge them. There is accountability for the wrong that's done, and there's no getting away from that. But sometimes we'll never break the cycles of pain unless we actually start to understand what caused the pain, what caused the brokenness that's flowing out. And as I say, I don't believe the system has the answers for that. Jesus' love does. Jesus' love sets captives free, and it's the journey that my friend is on, and it's the journey that's bringing healing and wholeness. It's the journey he told the judges about in his parole hearing. And that's the journey that I see time and time again. I can't remember if I previously shared, but God led me into about 20 years ago to write letters to the men and women that I deal with through my work. And so I ended up with a prison letter writing ministry that I hadn't planned on, but it's sort of got a life of its own. And so often I end up, or often in December, I take quite an amount of time off to write handwritten letters to each of these men. But the feedback that I've been getting from these men is mind-blowing and life-changing. I remember bumping into a gang member late last year, and I was dealing with a crime scene, and he walked past and he said, "Oh, hey, John." And I said, "Hey," back. I hadn't seen him for ages. And then about 10 minutes later, he came back and he said, "Oh, can we catch up?" And I said, yeah, that's fine. And we arranged a time and we caught up for a coffee, and we started chatting. And I hadn't really known where he was many times in the last few years. And so I said, "Oh, have you been getting my Christmas letters?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Your letters always arrive, whether at Christmas or New Year or mid-year, they always arrive at the right time, just when I need them the most, like when I've been thinking about taking my life." And I looked up, I'd been listening to what he was saying, I looked up and there were tears flowing down his face. And, that little bit of love, a Christmas letter, has kept a man safe, has given him hope. Another man rang me late last year, just before Christmas, and he reached out to me rang me up, and he said his name, and it was a particular name, and I knew straight away who it was because I didn't know anyone else of that name. And he said, "Oh, I've just rung you up to catch you up on what's been going on in my life." Well, I haven't heard from this man since 2013 when I arrested him for an aggravated robbery. And I just have been writing a letter to him every year since then at Christmas time. And he said, "John, your letters would come to me in prison and the guys would ask, who's that from?" And I would say, "Oh, just a friend, just a bro." He said, "I couldn't say it was from a policeman." And then he said, he got out of prison and he decided that he was going to leave the gang and get his life sorted. And so he said, "I started doing that, but didn't really do a great job of it because I didn't know how to be a normal person. And so I lost my partner and my children in the process." And then he said, coming into 23, 24, and 2023, I think, the end of that year, he said, "I was broken and alone." And he said, "I was sitting thinking about taking my life, and your letter arrived." And he said, "Because of what you wrote in your letter," he said, "I decided I need to give this a go." And he said, "God, if you're real, you need to take my desire for methamphetamine and marijuana from me." And he said within 2 weeks it was gone. He'd been addicted to it all his life since being a child. And he thought, right, I know this is real. So he looked up the internet for a men's rehab, went to one, all run by Christians, and now is serving in that rehab as a facilitator, a Christian. His story was on TV1 News at the end of the year. And these are the things I'm saying. I could tell you story after story of acts of love where God's just put on my heart to keep in connection with people, to demonstrate his kingdom, and just keep the door open like a prodigal father to prodigal sons. And so I want to encourage each one of you that we all have different places of influence and different places of operation and calling, but we're all part of the same body. And so pray for the harvesters. Another verse I just want to finish with, in John 7:37, they're having a big feast, and on the last day, Jesus stands up in a loud voice and he says, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink." And then he talks about how living water will flow from within them. But I want to come back to that. Let anyone who is thirsty come. We've got a thirsty nation. We're a thirsty nation that is full of addiction, that's full of desperation, looking for answers, and they don't know where to go because their parents never did the job. Because we've got such dysfunction in our parenting that's leading to dysfunctional adults as they grow up. And Jesus has the key, and there's a thirst, there's a hunger out there. And I'm finding as I'm just faithful in pointing people at the living water, I find that people respond, they recognize that what they've been trying doesn't satisfy, but what Jesus has to offer does. And so I want to encourage you that a couple of those things I've been mentioning, not on prayer points, and I encourage you to add into the prayers the praying for the harvest, that God would send out harvesters, and praying that the thirst in our nation, that people would be drawn to the living waters, because only He can feed and sustain the thirsty. So I think that's probably about my time allotment, and so I hope that speaks into some things to give you some inspiration for praying.